I realized that to learn, if I drew little funny bacteria with glasses and cigarettes, and then like kind of made up a funny story in a comic about how
Oh
that
my God.
bacteria then absorbs like, something else or whatever, how your immune system works. Like if I could create little characters and do drawings, I totally remembered it better. I learned better.
Wow. Welcome to Drawing Health, a podcast resource all about comics and well-being. Here you'll find interviews with artists, writers, and healthcare workers talking about the genre of comics called graphic medicine. You'll also find guided audio practices to help you build a gentle relationship with your body, overall health, and creativity. I'm Georgia Weber, comics artist and teacher, chronically ill and neurodivergent. It's my absolute pleasure to bring you this podcast in collaboration with the Sequential Artists Workshop, or SAW, a grassroots nonprofit comic school and creative community where I also teach the weekly class that gave our podcast its name. So listen and subscribe to explore the worlds of graphic medicine, creative health, and yourself with some excellent company. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Drawing Health podcast. MK, my guest this week, is probably one of the most well-known members of the Graphic Medicine International Collective. She has been a part of it from the start. She was one of the founding members of the collective and the Graphic Medicine website. We'll talk about everything. I mean, not everything actually, because that would be impossible. But I'll just say, I chose to introduce MK here more as the artist she is rather than all of those roles that she's played, because those roles are really public and those roles are often where she gets a lot of attention. And she's been making comics since, 2004, 2005. She's got a website full of comics that I'd love you to check out. And focusing on her from that perspective, I think really invites the whole person. So I hope you enjoy our podcast. I hope you enjoy our conversation. And don't forget to leave us a review and tell us what you thought, because not only does a review really help the podcast get out into people's ears, but I'm actually reading those reviews and I'd really like to know what you think. But for now, here's MK. Great. Okay. Well, I was brave and hit record. And I'm actually going to do an introduction this time and say that I'm here today with someone who I've actually known for a great many years, even though it's been at a distance and we're kind of more like virtual colleagues in many ways. But this is MK Czerwiec, who I think was among the first people I ever met who was telling me after I started publishing hey, did you know this is graphic medicine? You might have literally been the first who tapped me on the shoulder and said, so you're actually a part of something. And I didn't know it existed. This is many people's stories. We make a story that's personal, like Dumb was about myself and my life. We're telling a little part of our experience with health, and suddenly a community finds you and points it out. But you are also one of the originators of that community. The Graphic Medicine International Collective, that's like the nonprofit arm, I guess, of graphic medicine and the conference that it runs. And GMIC, as it's referred to, hosts the annual Graphic Medicine Conference. And I think that began in 2010, if I recall, or 2009.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, 2010. Yeah, I believe that's right. It's been a while.
Which now, 15 years. Oh my God.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, I think a lot of we could spend the whole hour, I'll say, talking about GMIC and your origination of the book that led to the Graphic Medicine Manifesto. I mean, I'm going to actually start that question again because I've just chopped it 3 times.
Okay.
So I'm sure that we could spend this entire hour talking about GMIC and all of the beautiful things that the Graphic Medicine Conference has brought about in both of our lives, and then all the things going on that I'm sure I don't even know about. But since I have you here, and I feel like you talk about that stuff quite a lot, I would love to focus a little bit more on you as a comics creator.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, because I did my homework and I went to your website and I looked at how many comics you've published. And I was like, yeah, why am I not thinking of MK first as an artist? It's just because your GMIC work is so incredible and you're really like a face of that organization in many ways. But I would really love to start by talking to you about something you said in, I think, multiple interviews, because I listened to a few in prep for this, you said comics were like a safe place for you. And that's the origin of your relationship to comics that then led you to including comics in your medicine work. And that finding that connection being like a bridge between two parts of yourself that
Yeah.
turned out to be a whole career, in fact.
Right.
I know you're like, you really just,
It's
you're living
crazy.
in it. You're swimming in it every day.
It's crazy.
So this idea, I would love you to tell me more about how comics is a safe place, either for you or others, and also maybe like memories of where that started for you.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think about it in sort of two registers, which I'm sure you can relate to, is like the reading of comics that felt like a safe place as a kid, particularly like newspaper comics. I've noticed that everybody has their kind of origin path to comics, and mine came through originally newspaper comics, but then really struggled to find a place there that I felt resonant with until I started reading the work of Linda Barry when I was in college. And then that was really where I found, yeah, like comics can be about difficult experiences and crummy families and parents being mean or ignoring you or whatever, like, yeah, like that was someplace that resonated for me. So that was really, I feel like then through Linda Barry's work and then kind of adding more on top of that was really where I found myself as a reader in comics. And then making comics was, I was like the kid that couldn't draw. I was told I was really good with words, so stop with the pictures
Oh,
and
I'm
stop
so
drawing.
sorry.
I know, right? It's really
Awful.
unfortunate, especially colors. Like I love color and I love playing with color
Mhm.
but I was told I had to leave all that behind, and I thought, okay. But then I think it started a little bit in nursing school because I realized like I really wanted to do well in school. I'd been sort of half-assing it until then. But I really wanted to do well because I really wanted to be a good nurse and know the science, and I thought I wasn't good at science, so I really applied myself. I was also an adult student. It was my second degree and really, really, focused. And I realized that to like learn if I drew little funny bacteria with glasses and cigarettes and then like kind of made up a funny story in a comic about how
Oh
that
my God.
bacteria then like absorbs like, something else or whatever, how your immune system works or whatever, like if I could create little characters and do drawings, I totally remembered it better. I learned better,
Wow.
like, or I would even like find an empty classroom when I was studying for an exam and do these goofy drawings on a board, and like the act of doing it helped me know it better. So that sort of, I think, planted the seed. Then fast forward, I was working as a nurse during the AIDS crisis, and I found myself circling back to it and realized it was an
Hmm.
incredibly powerful way for coping, right? Words were
Hmm.
alone weren't working, images alone weren't working, but putting them together in stepwise fashion is a comic. And that's kind
Yeah.
of that was my safe place to process really difficult experiences. But I
Hmm.
was doing it interestingly at the time, not partly for myself. I wasn't thinking of it in terms of like my own mental health. It was more like, how am I going to be present to that patient tomorrow if I'm still really caught up in all my own grief today, or when I
Hmm.
get up in the morning, and try to get ready to go to work. So it was about like trying to be a good caregiver, but I realized in the end it served my mental health.
Yeah. Wow. And of course, I mean, you've told this story so many times. There are many
Right.
layers we could access for pulling it apart in more detail. Um, I really like that you found those really useful practical elements of comics. Like you said, there's the stream of being a reader, but this is the beginning of you starting to make things, and
Mm,
it was practical for you. It wasn't like a lofty abstract thing that you were trying to achieve. It was just, this helps me remember, and
right.
I'm just picking it up like naturally, and then it becomes fun, and actually the fun is helping a very serious form of study. And then again, the help that comics provided you in processing experiences that we all really need to learn to process. Like we're not handed, at least not by our culture currently, in North America particularly, we're not handed any kind of pathway, steps to follow, common rituals and practices for the ways that we might witness other people's suffering, and forms of caregiving that are, of course, not considered seriously when, it's quote unquote women's labor. It's certainly not something people are thinking about that you would need to like recover from doing, that you would need
Right.
your own time and your own care then from doing the care for other people.
Right. No, it's true. I mean, and when it's really difficult things, and this happened during AIDS, and I think it happened also during COVID, and it happens in emergency rooms. It's secondary trauma.
Yes.
You are traumatized by just looking at things that our bodies aren't meant to look like, right? And hearing stories of profound
Oh,
loss and just bearing witness, right? So it was I like your word ritual. That's really nice because I think
mm,
that is exactly a part of what comics do for me. Just the making the boxes, putting something in the boxes, like there is a ritual to it. And I think that, yeah,
mm.
it is a healing ritual. Yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful. Um, yeah, I mean, healing ourselves, that seems like this impossible task, but then finding that something you always loved that you can do, even if you don't do it to a standard that other people think is absolutely marvelous and must become your career. You just sort of find it and it feels good. And
Hmm.
that's actually healing in one of the everyday ways that healing happens.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that it's important to think about, and I'm always talking about like comics that you make for you, that
Hmm.
you don't have to start looking at them with that critical eye of like, will so and so like it? Will it look good on social media? It's like this is about the process and how it's improving you and helping you.
Hmm.
And then also like I talk with medical students of like whatever it is, you've got to figure out what the tools are in your toolbox to, yeah, cope, right? To
Yeah,
cope with what you're going to have to be going into doing. Because otherwise you stuff it down and you don't deal with it, and we know that has bad consequences.
absolutely. For you and your patients, like you said, it's like,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
for people in your life, like it radiates out.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so I love the idea that making comics is one of the ways that you take care of yourself, that you take care of your well-being. This podcast is alternating between interviews with lovely people like you and then also audio guided practices that are coming from the class I teach called Drawing Health, same name, you get the idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Specifically to give people tools for taking care of themselves and a bit of support for that.
Hmm.
So one of the goals I have with the podcast is also to find out from people who create comics or who work in healthcare, or maybe in your case, do both. What are other things that you do to take care of your body and particularly to make sure that you can keep drawing comics through your life?
Hmm. Um. Uh. I'm at an age where I've sort of started realizing that I always knew intellectually that there's this important balance between kind of what I think you're gesturing to, like body and practices in life. And I always sort of like had this idea that I was having one was going well, like either I'm really
Yeah,
exercising and I feel like that's
one
going
or
well,
the other.
everything else, yeah, everything else is kind of going, and like, or I'm really like having a really good creative moment, but I haven't
Mm,
exercised in 6 weeks or whatever.
yep.
you
Familiar.
know, right? Like, and so, but I'm finally, or I've ignored a spiritual practice, right? Like, that's not
Mm,
as clear for me, but right, like paying attention to those needs. Like, I finally feel like I'm at a point where, and I'd always hoped this would be, but I'm 50, about to turn 58 years old, and I think, no, I'm about to turn 59 years old.
wow. Yeah.
That I finally feel like I'm fortunately at this moment, for this moment, in a place where I know that I've got to balance those things,
Hmm.
right? Like I've got to balance making sure I get X amount of exercise, X amount of days a week, and have a nice practice set up with that. And then the other thing is like I'm learning to play guitar,
Yeah.
and like music, and finding a way to challenge my brain, but also like make music and in community,
Mhm.
service to others. So like I'm not working as a nurse, so just finding ways to serve my community is how I'm surviving the difficult moment. I can't fix anything in Washington, D.C. I can't fix
Yeah.
any of the horrible things
The
happening.
harsh truth. Yeah.
Yeah, but I've just really tried to ramp up finding a soup kitchen where I can help serve a meal or deliver food to elders or whatever, like finding that stuff from my community. And that oddly is part of my self-care.
Absolutely.
And then yeah, and making art, making sure that continue to find play and challenge in my art. But every one of those things, I've come to finally realize that if I do it in community, it will work and it will happen versus just wishing it had happened or being like cranky with myself because it hasn't happened, right? Like
Hmm.
I find a community of a gym, a community where I work with food delivery services, a community where I make comics. I check in with a good comic making friend every Sunday morning. We have drawing together once a month. Like
Yeah.
all that's like I'm now doing our podcast with Alex, right? Like
Mhm.
just doing things in community. I realized, and it took me a long time to figure out how to make that work, but for me and the way that I work, that's what works. Yeah.
Oh, it's brilliant. And I think that's a large part of the cartoonist struggle too, is not just the balancing of all these aspects of life, but specifically that the thing we're doing for ourselves for most of our time is in isolation, like in your
Right.
studio at home, or maybe
Right.
you have a studio outside the home, but you still go there to be alone for
Right.
the
Right.
most part. And you're quiet and you're studying things on the page which take a really long time to create, as I'm sure
Yeah.
you are also aware. Like anytime you've put a book together, it's years of work.
Right.
Even if you produced it all at a different pace of life, like it's even just gathering things and then finding ways to stitch it together. Like books are
Right.
massive projects,
Right.
and comics are massive. And we do so much of it alone. And many people are trying to supplement with online contact, which actually, for me, doing this podcast is one of those things. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm I need to do something where I'm connecting with people, but I've learned recently, being diagnosed as autistic and ADHD and CPTSD, that actually I'm happiest when I am alone most of the time. I prefer not to be in crowded spaces or even
Yeah.
group gatherings. Like I've given myself a limit that I don't ever expect myself to spend time with more than four people at once because more than four people that I'm actually having to socialize and attend to and make eye contact and have conversation with is just
It's too much. Yeah.
it's not even that it really feels bad in the moment. It's when I walk away that I go, whoa, I am drained. I can't
Yeah.
keep doing that. And it gives me physical pain too. That's part of my chronic illness situation. But having the podcast feels like this is my space for my social world to get bigger and also for me to like bring all of the genius that is in that community, in the comics
Mm.
community and out in the health community, making it more accessible and also making it a bigger part of my life, that this conversation, which I am thoroughly enjoying and will continue to just have a ball doing, is also a service. Like the
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
skill that we both have of speaking that we've learned from many years of teaching and
Hmm.
in your case, I think more than mine, like giving presentations and talks,
Right.
that's a skill set. It
Oh,
makes for a
absolutely.
lovely conversation and a lovely
Right.
thing for people to hear that also might make them feel in their own bubble, whatever that looks like, that they're with us. And I like being with people with my voice. So speaking of being with people in a conversation like now, a lot of your work has been being with people at the end stages of life. And I'm really interested in what you find as you try to engage people with that. Because I have a theory, and I think it's shared by other people, and I've certainly read it places, so it's not just mine. But the theory about our fear as a culture of facing disability and illness is a fear of death in many ways, and a refusal to consider things that feel like death is coming sooner or that some aspect of us is dying, whether that's like the loss of mobility in your body, the fear of mental, intellectual differences, because we all develop those as we age. That's really a like death phobic position that our culture takes, to not be willing to consider disabled people as like worthy of care and attention, and to not be willing to show up for each other in illness in ways that are very intuitive to us, actually. It's just the kind of sterilization we've had with capitalism taking over, and this phobia of death that you actually are just sitting with all the time and talking to people about, teaching classes where you're like, how do we get people to talk about it if that's
Yeah.
the culture that they're in? So I'm really curious just about how you find people reacting to that work you're doing.
I think I was really surprised how well received so just as an example, a very concrete example, when COVID was just like the initial COVID lockdown, so like
Hmm.
we're talking March of 2020,
Yeah.
a colleague and I were already committed to teaching an undergraduate class on called Death Panels and how comics can help us talk about end of life. And I became more and more anxious about the well-being of our students when we were
Yeah.
asking them to read about and draw about and deal with dying and death on a weekly basis, right? When they were like most terrified of that. But in a way, it was really a perfect opportunity to acknowledge a lot of what you just said, right? My book is called Taking Turns, and it's a reference to a comment that was made in one of the interviews I did for the project. And it was one of the doctors who said the thing about working during the AIDS crisis was that all of us were aware that we were all people taking turns being sick. I may be the doctor or the nurse today, but I will be the patient tomorrow. Our patients and family and their families are also were people who worked right in our own unit in our
Hmm.
hospital. There was literally no boundary between the cared for and the carers. And I realized that that, to my mind, was one of the most exportable things about the AIDS crisis was that now I carry that the rest of my life. Like I am always aware that it's an artificial barrier, right?
Hmm.
That we will at all, every one of us at some point will be dealing with disability, right? We are all disabled in one way or another, and if not in this current moment, then it's in the future, right? Or the past or the present, whatever. So that wasn't your question. So that was just in my mind, and I was thinking
Mm.
about that in the context of teaching death panels. Is that I think once people can kind of, there's a cultural fascination with death, right? There's a fascination within the work of many artists
Yeah.
with that awareness of end of life, and comics bring a really interesting perspective to that, because the specific aspect of end of life that we're looking at is not the sensationalized, is not like we can have. There's lots of dying and death in comics, but it's all like violent. It's
Yeah.
all, like not natural, slow decline death, the stuff that, you were referring to that we shy away from. But the great thing about like graphic medicine is finding examples of what natural death looks like and being able to portray it in comics is sometimes an easier way to kind of watch that happen than actually watching a movie of it or there's something about the medium. Like I always think of a classic example of Marissa Moss's Last Things, about her husband having died of ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. And it was a very, very difficult death. It was an ugly
Yeah.
death. It was a hard death, but there's something about her drawing style that helps us through that.
Hmm.
And I think there's something about comics being a way to help us face it without being as terrifying, if that makes any sense, or as traumatizing, right? Like something
Yeah.
about comics as a way of dealing with it. So to that end, to your question
Hmm.
specifically, is that the response I think once kind of in the material has been very, very positive, and people, I have one exercise where I ask people to draw a good death, and of course, really interrogating that notion of a good death,
Hmm.
and that what we come out of it. And I've done this with groups of college students. I've done it with people elderly. I've done it with people just randomly in the community who wanted to engage in this kind of conversation. And what's amazing is that people come out of drawing something like that with a much clearer understanding of should they have agency in the way that their life ends, realization of what their values are, what's important to them. So when you look at what someone's drawn, who's in the room, who's not? Is there music? Are you outdoors? Are you indoors? Not very many
Mhm.
people draw themselves on a ventilator, right? So like
Yeah, that
people
makes
can come
sense.
to a clearer understanding of kind of what their thoughts are about this process and having agency in this process, should they be fortunate enough to have agency. So anyway, that's a long answer to some initial thoughts about.
Oh my goodness, yeah. But so rich too, because that made me think of, well, probably too many questions for me to ask you in this moment. But I'm comforted to hear that people, once you offer them a way to engage, that they want that and they move through it, even with discomfort. Like people signed up
Mm-hmm.
for that class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They decided to do it, and then once they were there, like I remembered hearing you talk about the good death exercise in another talk as well, where you said, I didn't say your good death,
Yeah.
it's a good
A.
death.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is a really helpful like
Mm-hmm.
reframe as well, when thinking about this stuff, that we're often very clear on what we think would be the kindest and the most supported and the most caring and what we really want for each other.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't automatically apply what we want for other people back to ourselves. It actually is a separate process
Mm-hmm.
to say, wait, but what about me? And honestly, the first thing that comes up when I started, well, I say when I started to do this kind of reflection, but it is something I have to keep coming back to regularly because life can, get me carried away and I become unmoored or ungrounded from the kind of foundational element of me being alive in this moment, and the fact that it's going to end is part of that.
Right.
Because I am a person living with many complicated needs for accommodation and specific types of care and lifestyle that I'm balancing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't ever want to take it for granted when I'm having a good day, for example.
Yeah.
So I do have that practice of coming back and like reminding myself where my values lie. And if I do start to apply the things I wish for other people to myself, the first thing that my body and brain does is kind of shrug it off. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
me. Yeah.
maybe. Like, I don't know. But then if
Yeah.
I dig in
Mm.
further, there's real resistance to applying those things to myself. There's
Interesting.
part of
Yeah.
me that is like, well, but I can't ask for that. I can't
Right.
expect that.
Right.
That would never happen for me. I want that for everyone, but it's not
Right.
realistic.
Right. Right.
And so thinking about what we might actually need feels both audacious and really depressing. If you have to consider that you might be put into thousands of dollars of debt for a surgery that's medically necessary for you to live, that's really hard to grapple with. So of
Yeah.
course the thought process will stop because your brain's like, I don't want to think about how unfair and fucked up and impossible it would be for me to carry like $200,000 of debt for a surgery.
Yeah.
And yet
Yeah.
that's what happens. And it's much harder if you haven't thought about it, I think, like to get caught in that situation. But we're all kind of living on the hope and the crossed fingers of maybe I'll get lucky and I just won't need something like that in my life.
Right.
Because we all need different things. So our lives are unfolding just as uniquely as they are so mundane.
Yeah, yeah. I was always really moved. Like I studied philosophy as an undergrad, and one of the things that always surprised me was when Aristotle talked about what we need for the good life. The needs of the body and the soul, whatever. And one of them
Mhm.
was just good fortune, right? Like,
Oh, yeah. We
right,
need
like
luck.
right, like exactly. And I was like, yeah, that. I mean, we don't ever want to acknowledge it's a factor, but like good
Yeah,
fortune, like and there's not much we can do. I think that's hard for us to face because there's nothing we can do to kind of make that happen, right?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. You're like
yeah,
hoping and wishing that you're lucky, but
right,
yeah, that you can't affect it.
right, right, right.
Yeah. And I'm curious here too. So I wanted to ask you previously, and then you just reminded me. You said that nursing was your second degree. So your first degree was philosophy
In English, yeah, literature and
and
philosophy,
English.
yeah,
Okay. So
yeah,
what took you from that life path into wanting to become a nurse and serve people with healthcare?
yeah. Part of it was I just needed a job. Like
I relate.
I think I had my head in the sand in college, in that I was like really like I saw college as this opportunity to really learn all this cool stuff about literature and philosophy and psychology and all the things I felt like I was really called to. And I
Mhm.
just thought the whole work thing would work itself out. Like I had been an RA in college, and I thought, well, those are skills I'll use to get a job. Well, when I went out into the world, those were not skills that I could use to get a job.
Nobody was
And
impressed.
yeah, I was like, oh, I'll be an event planner. Like events are fun, like
Yeah.
that didn't work. So then I had sort of been raised to be a nurse because my mother was a nurse and my
Okay.
father had had a massive stroke when I was in high school. And so I was literally caregiving the whole time I was in
Wow.
college. And like my mother being a retired nurse brought home like there were hospital corners on his bed, not just like we made the bed, and like we
Mhm.
had a regimen for his care, like so I knew like what a care plan was. I knew like I just I went into nursing school like ready and with
Yeah.
skills already.
Wow.
So, and I was really into story and how stories help us heal. And that's been one thread that's been like throughout my whole life. And so, because I was going to be a writer, that was the other thing I was going to do. Like, oh,
Oh,
I'll be a
cool.
writer.
Yeah.
But I realized like I like having written. I don't like writing.
Uh-huh. So also very relatable.
Right, right. I hate writing, and then but I
Hmm.
love when I've like written something good. Anyway, so I realized like okay, I have the skills, but then the scary part was like I was never science oriented and certainly not math oriented, and so that was that point where I just was like, okay, I got to figure this out. And I realized I was raised to be a nurse. I can help people being a nurse, so it meets that service need that I have, and and I'll be near good stories, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, like
Wow.
I'll be able to see cool things, and that was long before I put the ethics of like whose story is it. And it's not my story to tell. Like I learned that stuff later, but that's what drove
Yeah.
me to go to be a nurse. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I find that absolutely fascinating where, I've been teaching people something that I've learned the hard way, which is that the things that are easy for you are actually your skills. They're
Mm,
not your skills are not just the things that you worked really hard at. They're the things
yeah.
that come naturally that feel so easy that you often discount them.
Mm,
And you took that path, the I'm not going to say easy because obviously you were struggling with like not feeling you were adequate at science and having to push yourself, and those are real big efforts, and any school program is a really big effort. And at the same time, you could have chosen any other program, but this one was kind of an easy choice. You were ready, you had those skills already in your mind, and you've been living a lifestyle very much informed by like how a nurse does things.
right.
And following that ease, which also involved a lot of effort, you landed in a position to be part of something absolutely new and wonderful in the graphic
Right.
medicine community.
Right.
Like
Right.
if you'd just gone off and stuck with writing, you may never have landed quite here.
Right. And it's so funny because it looks like it was this straight line of like, well, I studied that stuff that informed me as a nurse, and then I had both of those things, the humanities and the health experience, to be ready to do graphic medicine. And
Hmm.
it looks like a straight line, but of course it was anything but, right? It was all
Oh
over the
yeah, this
place,
wasn't the plan, and nobody
Right.
had like
Right.
no one could have told you if you do this, then that, that's where you're going to end up.
Right.
I mean, it
Right.
didn't
Right.
exist really. Like you were
Right.
part of
And it
that
just,
moment of it being, I mean, I won't say it didn't exist because people have been writing
right.
comics about health, but
Right.
it hadn't gotten
Right.
its identity.
Right, right. And it was just like someone described like becoming an AIDS doctor, which no one ever planned to do when they were in medical school, right?
Yeah,
But like the way he
exactly.
described it was like I just had the right experience at the right moment in history and the right
Hmm.
skills to be able to do that. And that's exactly how I feel about sort of being a part of graphic medicine coming up was like I just happen to have the right background, the right skills in the right moment of history.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and the natural decision as you did to like reach out and email Dr. Ian Williams about his
Right,
cool website called Graphic
right,
Medicine.
right, right,
Things like that people often discount as well as like, oh, I fell into it, but I'm like, you're a person who would send that email, and there are plenty of people who wouldn't.
right.
And I find that
And
really
also
cool to point out.
and also like send that email, ask
Oh,
people for
encouraging people.
things.
Yeah, please.
Yeah,
It's a really
they
good
can
idea.
always say no, like
Hmm.
right, like but if you really like email your favorite cartoonist, right? Like
Yeah.
when I was really struggling with I really wanted to make a book about the work I did on the AIDS unit, but I didn't have the skills as a cartoonist. I just emailed Brian Feast because his book
It's
Mom's Cancer
amazing.
was so influential. and he was like the nicest person, and wrote like literally down to like, how do I get the background really white but the lines really black, like down to that level of
Wow.
minutia. And he gave me a step by step of like what Photoshop did at that time. And it's just like cartoonists generally, partly because we work alone, we often are really nice people who are like eager to help, right? Like
Mhm.
that's one of the things I loved, particularly in contrast to what I experienced of being in the literary world, where someone else's success is like, oh God, they got the success before I did, right? There's a competitive piece. In
Yeah.
comics,
Yeah.
I found, at least in the moment I'm coming up in it, people are like, your success is our success. You know that, like
Right.
that Dumb was like such an amazing comic and did so
Oh, thank
well.
you.
Like, yay, we're all coming forward, right? Like,
That's
it's
beautiful.
a yeah, and I love that about comics. I've gone off on a tangent, but I just
That's
love that
great.
about yeah.
Yeah, I'm a very tangent prone person, so I'm all in for your tangents because they validate mine and I will happily follow you. Um, no, I love this tangent, and actually, I really wanted to bring in so your most recent work, which is called LB and Me. The LB is a reference to Linda Berry, and this story, which I wasn't able to get a hold of before our conversation, but I'm very eager to read, is I guess telling like the you story of how comics became safe and accessible for you to create. Like you had said, you were reading them before and you were like drawing as your studies, but there was this turning point of Linda Berry that gave you like a new way to be the artist.
Yeah,
Because like I said, I really want to honor you like as an artist first in this interview.
I
So I'm
appreciate that.
curious if you could tell me a little bit about I guess what LB and Me is about. I'm sorry asking you to summarize a book that people can totally
No,
read, but I'm like,
no,
give
it's
me the cliff
okay. It's
notes.
okay. I
And I'll
no,
go
I
read it
love it.
after.
I love talking about it, and I love telling its kind of origin story. Is that yeah? So it's like it's fun because it's on a whole bunch of registers. So Linda Berry's comics, I feel like gave me permission to make comics and make them, you know, like that I was the only person who could make my comics, right? And like that's what I tell my students, like you're the only one who can make those marks
Yeah,
in your way,
so
right?
true.
So you make it, right? So I feel like Linda Berry gave me that permission, and so I did. But then it went. So that was sort of like the first piece of the story, and then the next piece of this. So basically, the book is organized around like difficult times in my life when I kept turning to comics, and then somehow Linda Berry was a part of the process that made it better.
Oh, that's amazing.
So there was the original thing, like to make comics at all, while I was working as a nurse and really trying to figure it out. Then it was to when I was going through a difficult time with caregiving elderly family members. And I felt like going back to comics and what Linda Berry was doing in her books, where she started making comics syllabus, comics as an educational and like self-reflective in a way. That gave me this permission to just again use that medium to survive, and then also like using it to gain a professional understanding of who I could be as an educator, right? Like to see how Linda
Hmm.
Berry did it, went from being a cartoonist to being an educator, and I kind of adapted a lot of her work in becoming an educator. And so then in the book are some funny stories about like kind of what I was just saying about trying to approach her as a person,
Oh yeah,
and
love
how
that.
you know, like I kind of freaked out and burst into tears and ran away, like so like funny stories of just encountering, and then kind of
Yeah.
evolving to a point where we've actually been able to teach together. And I just
Oh my
wanted,
goodness, I didn't know.
yeah, it was really wonderful. And like she's such a wonderful, gracious person. And one of the things she said to me, like when the first time I met her, when I did burst into tears, after she walked away, thank God,
Oh.
was that because I had said, you know, I'm taking a lot of the exercises you have in syllabus or making comics. I think it was syllabus, and I said, you know, and I'm adapting those to work with medical students. Is that okay? And what she said was like, yes, that, you know, like I don't lose anything. I only gain if you continue to kind of like let those ripples move out, right? And that was just so gracious and so appreciated. And so yeah, so then I also was like realized that you know, she continues to be this amazing giving human, like with her benefits through social media, right, and through her Etsy account of like just deciding, I can't do anything about this problem in the world, but maybe I can I'll make some art and talk about
Exactly.
making this art and then sell, like, again, comics as care, to sell it, to raise money for, and then give all that money to a charity that's helping with that problem in ways that I can't, right?
Hmm.
Just the way
Yeah.
she's still doing that stuff today is just amazing. And influencing so many generations of people. So anyway, so it's just a whole number. And the framing I did was around how we teach. There's this thing in medicine where it says the way they teach medicine is watch one, what is it, like, see one, do one, teach one, right?
Yeah, I've heard this
So I
phrase.
talked about
Yeah.
that and translate that to comics. Like, you see
Mm.
one, you read it, you do one, and then you teach others, right? So it's
Yeah.
very transferable. And then the last part I'll say is that I realized that, again, the only things I do in groups. And so I remembered people in my life who had talked about their origin story as cartoonists or scholars, or however, scholars who use comics, coming from and through Linda Berry. And so I asked each of them that I could think of, and then a few people referred me to other people, to just do a single page tribute to how their work has been influenced by Linda Berry, or how Linda Berry is part of their origin story. And so then I include 15 of those in the book as well.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Being able to show other people's work next to yours and like the common thread being this incredible inspiration. And being a teacher myself, like I do feel very similar to her gracious expression. And I do think it's gracious like as a choice. I've made the choice to be gracious when people are being taught by me, as I'm just like, take anything I teach you and teach it to someone else. And if
Yeah.
you think of it, if it's appropriate, like mention that I was your teacher and
Right.
that's my thanks. Like I don't
Yeah.
need
Cite your source. Yeah.
yeah, I don't need to own it. I don't need to be
Right.
paid for it unless you're like making a ton of money off of it, in which case I might say, a little financial thanks would be nice. Um,
Yeah.
but it's always going to have your mark on it is the thing.
Yeah.
Like no matter what I give you, I'm kind of synthesizing all of these different things I've been taught, and it's coming out of
Hmm.
me this way. When I give you something or I have an experience with you, I facilitate an experience for you, I know that I'm just entering the stream of all the things you will then synthesize and move
Yeah.
forward with. Even if you decide to take an exercise I did and do the same thing, it's coming from you now.
Right.
That uniqueness, like you said, it's only you who can make those comics. It's only you who can be in this moment with the students you're teaching.
Yeah.
Citing sources is a great way to say thank you
Right.
and to give people who are curious another avenue so that they can follow their curiosity out and find other similar things that might enrich their lives in other ways and beyond. Because yeah, I think it's another sort of ill of capitalism is this idea that we have to kind of cling to
Right.
the brand that I've created and say this is
Right.
mine. And there's
Right.
a protective aspect to it that's quite important because we don't want people
Exploiting.
exactly exploiting and like just taking someone else's work without actually applying themselves and saying this is
Right.
mine and it came from nowhere and not giving things. So there's protection reasons for why things like intellectual property are protected. But it's true that at least in my experience, which mirrors yours, in comics, we're all just really happy that people are doing it, happy people are reading, happy people are
Right.
making them. There's not as much of that feeling that you have to kind of like earn a place before we'll take you seriously. Like the
Right.
moment you start making comics, we're like, yay!
Right. Right.
So glad you're
Right.
here. You're a comics artist too. Oh my gosh.
Right.
Which yeah, brings me to another idea, which is that honestly, you said how old you're turning earlier in this episode, and I was not going to ask you how old. I was not. I was very pointedly not going to ask that question because the things that I've learned about your career, and I actually did like part of my prep for interviews is to write out a chronology of the information I gather from
Mm.
other places because I'm just trying to understand if I'm holding like what your work was in the context of the time it was created when I
Mm.
think about it and ask questions. I'm just curious too. I'm just an autistic weirdo and I want to know all the data about everybody.
I know. I get it. I get it.
Yeah. And what I realized is I feel like from everything I can see in your online interviews and in how many things you've published, like looking at every single thing you've got on your website goes back to, I think the earliest one that I found on the website was from 2004. But then in an interview, you mentioned one that isn't on the website called Hospice Comics.
Yeah.
When did that come out? I don't even know. But here we are in
Yeah.
2025, and I'm like, how many lifetimes have you already lived?
I know. It's what happens when you get old. You just realize you've lived a bunch of lifetimes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I wasn't going
Yeah.
to ask you,
Yeah.
but I do have a follow-up question here, which is having lived all of these lifetimes and also being a part of and really at the beginning of what is now turning into a massive wave of more graphic medicine being created. Are there phases that are coming for you? Like the next phase in your life as you imagine it, whether that's a changed because of
Mm.
your aging and abilities shifting, or is it maybe an opportunity for you to kind of start a new dream of something that hasn't been addressed yet? Is there anything that you're looking forward to as like the next phase of your career or just
Mm.
your life? It doesn't have to be so work oriented.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you ask very insightful questions.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. It's interesting because that was something that's on my mind is that I'm currently in a creative practice that feels very different and new and also like step in a new direction that I know is integrated with comics. I'm certainly not going away from it, but uh, making like playing with color. Play. I mean, I've always kind of
Mm.
done watercolors, but more, and I've always painted with acrylics. Like I started making a lot of little paintings and drawings, but
Wow.
more like right now I'm really in like jelly printing. Like, have you ever done jelly printing?
No, I've never tried it.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. My friend Beth Tremblay, who did a wonderful graphic memoir called Look Again,
Hmm.
um, she got me really interested in it, and I am like obsessed. It's just what, and I think part of what it is that comics are so ordered, right? And I don't have any kind of formal diagnosis, but I definitely have like traits of like easy overwhelm, like ADHD type stuff,
Sure.
needing to create order out of chaos, easily overwhelmed, whatever. So we won't go into that. But comics work for me because they help create order out of chaos, right? They put things in
Hmm.
boxes, and that I can
Yeah.
handle. And when I'm doing this box, I don't have to worry about all the other boxes, right? So for
Amazing.
me, that is very helpful and useful. And chaos art, where you just don't have a plan and you're just like moving color around, that didn't work. That felt
Hmm.
too overwhelming, and I couldn't really handle it. But I'm at a point where I'm starting to be able to handle it. And the thing
Ooh,
about jelly printing, for example, is you're just playing with color, and I integrate like nature into it. So I use a lot of like
lovely.
leaf patterns and like found things. You said you've been foraging, and I'm constantly
Mhm.
foraging for things I can make art out of, right?
Yeah,
Like
that's
so, yeah,
amazing.
like it's amazing what like noticing what the earth produces and gives to us to do
Yes.
something with.
You're speaking my language
And
right now. Yes.
yeah, right. Like it's like some of those things you can eat, and that's going to help you
Hmm.
survive in that way. But for me, I'm constantly foraging now. Like I do a lot of walks. I live in an area where I have so many wonderful trails I can hike, and I do a lot of walks. And now it's like I'm walking, especially at this transition season, and thinking about what am I being offered by the fall that I can work with, and what am I gonna not be able to have access to when winter comes, and what will I,
Hmm.
all that way that you have to think, which puts me so much more in touch with like my natural surroundings and grounded and in ways I just have never been in my life before. And I think part of that groundedness is giving me permission to be a little more chaotic in my art. And so
Yeah.
I'm just because like you can start a print and you can think you know what's going to happen,
Hmm.
but it's going to take its own path. And there's a chaos to doing it that I love, and a chaos to the outcome I can't predict. And a long time ago, an artist and art therapist once said to me, I can't wait to see what you create when you let yourself just go. And that never, I was like, well, that's not going to happen because
I
that
know.
doesn't feel safe. You can just sit and
Yeah, you're
wait.
like, and this letting go, is it supposed to be a painful process? Is it
Right.
supposed to be
Yeah.
terrible? Are
Yeah.
we
Tell me the
supposed to
step
hate
by
it?
step way that I am going to let go. Right.
No,
Like
exactly.
clearly missing the point.
Yeah.
So yeah, so like I feel like I'm maybe entering that, and that's really
Cool.
exciting. That's I think there'll be times in the future where I am a caregiver again, but
Yeah.
right now I'm really enjoying being I was a caregiver from a very young age for a very long time, and it was actually disorienting. I actually wrote
Mm.
about this in the new introduction to, or the introduction to the menopause anthology. It was disorienting to be at a point in my life where I wasn't caregiving. And I think for a lot of women that's true. So I'm really enjoying a period in my life when I'm not taking care of another human except me,
Mhm.
and that may change in the future.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it does feel like especially because you identified things like easy overwhelm and needing order, it's very hard to establish like a sense of safety so that you can play if
Yeah,
you're being asked to do something that actually makes you feel upset or unsafe. Like it's got to be the safety comes first.
yeah.
Which is why like one of my sort of catchphrases is support is more important than making the right choice or making the best art or whatever it is. Like
Hmm.
support is going to bring you to that safety. And then once you have that safety, and even just a little, because most of us will never experience a true sense of just full safety and freedom because the world we live in is not a safe place.
Yeah.
So it's not like an achievement. It's not like a level you have to like climb up to and then you stay there perfectly. It's much more this constant negotiation of how can I feel safe in this world? And especially if you grow up with a very specific circumstance, anything outside of that is going to feel new, which brings a little risk. But I think you absolutely nailed it by saying like most women are going to have an experience at some point of not needing to take care of other people, even if it's brief, and
Mm-hmm.
how disorienting that can be based on how
Mm-hmm.
our culture teaches the gender roles, both
Right.
explicitly and implicitly, that we
Right.
then identify with. And
Right.
feel like, oh my God, but if I'm not caring for someone, what is the point of my life? Like, what am I
Yeah. Who
doing?
am I? Right.
Yeah, and also what good am I doing? And like how do I
Yeah.
sort of feel my place in relation to others? But that's also the space where you have to get to know who you are as the person who is both giving the care to you and receiving the care from you. It's a more complete version of you to experience both the giver and receiver because you are the same person.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
from that, oh my goodness, the level of safety that you can gain, and I am speaking from experience, but I'm also speaking as a 36-year-old. So I regularly laugh at myself when I tell people in my life, like as I get older, because I'm like, I'm still so young. I'm still
Yeah.
such a kid. But I still have the benefits of a little bit of age. And one of those things is when you meet yourself. When I met myself and discovered that actually that's kind of my job every day is to meet who I am today, how I'm feeling today, in the newness of that, as well as with the perspective of the me I've come to know and the regard I have for taking care of myself now. A whole lot of freedom opens up. Like finding that bit of safety and self security and sense of self, and what Toni Morrison would call just self regard, it actually changes the whole world. Like it changes how I interact with the whole world.
Right.
And it's delightful that you're finding like tolerance for chaos because you've
Yeah.
established so much of, who you are and what you're doing here and how you live your life and
Yeah.
nature as a big part of that. It is a big part for me too.
Yeah.
There was something I wanted to say to ask you about after I did that little tangent rant. I'm curious because, like I keep referring to, you really are in the core of people who identified that graphic medicine is a really important identity to give people so that they can organize and find things that actually help these really challenging experiences we all have. And that's not just for patients, like it's you said for caregivers as well, for people who might be interested in like policy and decision making. Comics can make that sexy, and I'm all for it. Being the one of the people who has the full perspective of like before graphic medicine was here and the work you've done to bring it into its own being in the world or to just gather the folks that then are this new thing together, a community together. What do you dream of for graphic medicine in the future now that like I just feel since the lockdowns and the pandemic and everyone having this very universal experience with their own stories taking place within it,
Hmm.
we are all expecting, and we're all in fact seeing already, the flood of graphic medicine that is coming, if not, already here. The absolute like exponential growth of awareness of this field, but also people making it, and the stories that we would categorize and include as graphic medicine in the context of this worldwide health experience. Where does your imagination go from here for what graphic medicine could do and what you would want to see?
It goes from like the concrete things to the bigger dreamy things. So concrete things like I would really like to see um the medium of comics used to help people when they can't absorb information or are too stressed. So like
Mm-hmm.
when you go to pick up a prescription, I'm always unbelievably floored by the ridiculous amount of information that is in a block of text that no one ever reads.
Yeah, the many sheets of folded paper that I just throw out because I can't
Right.
get through all that.
You
It
read
probably
that?
doesn't
Right.
pertain to me, fingers crossed.
Right. Right. At this point, I don't think I've ever talked to anyone who read. I mean, and I'm not, I know there's a lot of it's legal, not mumbo jumbo, but
Yeah.
like the most important elements, like that I shouldn't eat grapefruit while I take this medicine, or
Right.
like, give me the most important things I need to know in like a 4 to 8 panel comic, right? I just broke my arm. I'm being discharged home from the hospital, or I've had a stay in the hospital and I've got some complicated. Give me the things I need of great essence because I can't read all that. The little
Hmm.
folder you send me home with, I'm not going to read that with the
Yeah.
stock pictures of like someone who I can't identify with, right? Like,
Yeah.
give me
Yeah.
the most important elements, even in the simplest. Another context I look at is like, and there are some projects doing all of these things, but you just like the dream is that it becomes more of the accepted practice.
Mm.
Um, things like consent forms, like we go in for a procedure and we sign a consent form. Sometimes, like, I was at a hospital where they just had a little electronic pad, and they're like, so you're just signing the consent form. And I go, I don't even have a copy of the consent form. Like,
Yeah.
literally, let alone I'm not going to read it. Or if you stand there and read a consent form, they'll start telling you, well, all it says is X.
They do. Yeah, they jump in. I've had that
Right.
experience. Yeah.
There's no right, exactly. And it's just like, how about the most important things I need to know in like an 8 panel comic and then I sign, right? So like,
Yes.
and we talk in bioethics about informed consent. No one's
Yeah.
giving
I was gonna
informed
say,
consent.
you're giving me the idea that we should have our terms and conditions as comics too, because how many fucking things do I sign up for where I just click yes? I
Well,
have
a
no idea
thousand
what the
percent.
implications of that are at all.
Right. Right, exactly. Like so in yeah, so those are like really concrete, like as a nurse that I've
Mhm.
dealt with and as a patient that I see, and I just will be in a situation where like, God, this should be a comic, right? Um and also like so many providers, when I talk to doctors and nurses and healthcare providers, they're not resistant to that. They're like,
Mm,
yeah,
interesting.
I
Yeah.
don't want my patients to fail. I want them to succeed. And so
Mhm.
like whatever. So there's that. But then on a larger scale, like I would love to see um uh, a lot more inpatient. Like, I mean, again, this is, I guess, very specific, but like comics being used as a therapeutic intervention with patients and families as a routine, right? And not just for like we have art therapy in schools, in schools, in hospitals for children. But
Oh,
I
yeah.
was fortunate enough to grow up in a hospital unit, grow up as a nurse, where we had a full room, and it's in my book, Taking Turns, dedicated
Mhm.
to the important work that making things does for adults in any difficult situation, right?
Yeah.
So
Any
like that
age.
kind of right, any age, exactly. So like kind of like therapeutic intervention. So art therapists working with comics in inpatient and outpatient hospital settings, support groups, all that stuff. Like lots of that. And then I think most recently, and maybe I'm not answering your question, but these are just like things
No, I love
I
it.
dream and hope, and I find myself talking about, like maker spaces, comics maker spaces in institutions of any shape or size, where you could
Oh,
like
that's
they have,
amazing.
like the design maker spaces, like applying design thinking to problem solving for nurses, right? So maybe
Yeah.
there's hospitals that actually have a maker space where you can go make the thing you need with a 3D printer or whatever. But that for comics, for universities, like so, I was at Pitt and I was looking at they call a Creative Commons space, which is
Mm.
doesn't matter what you're studying. And it's analogous to like Linda Berry's comics room at University of Wisconsin-Madison, like just a space where you go to think in the arts, specifically then comics. I'm sure there's other universities I don't know about that do this, but like looking at that model and like what makes it work and what makes people actually engage with it and using, Linda Berry says we brought the arts with us through all of our phases of evolution because it serves an important role. And for adults who think, oh, I don't do that, that's not me, right? Like creating the infrastructure and spaces that can do that. I would love the Center for Graphic Medicine or whatever in institutions that do
Wow.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's both a really big dream and also very concrete. Like that could happen. And I don't fully know what we need to do to get there, but I also think exactly what you're doing, like just being engaged with making sure people know about graphic medicine and they have resources like the podcast that you run through GMIC, the website. It's a resource. And
Right.
that kind of resourcing, especially the longer it sticks around as a continuous project, the more kind of like word of mouth can actually spread it beyond where you even have access to now. It's so fascinating to me that both in medicine, from what I've heard from doctors and people that I've seen, and also from the little bits of dabbling and studying it that I've done, the research, and this is the same for comics too, and same for graphic medicine, the research is like letting us know here's where we need to be. This is what we need to do. This is really valuable. But to have that then filter down to be a part of people's everyday lives, to
Yeah.
even be in the room with your family doctor, like the research is 20 years ahead of where any doctor is at in their office right now, unless they're like working hard to stay on top of it and supported within the structure of their whatever their office is or their organization, but also then like what their medical associations allow them to do and don't allow and where the funding is coming from. Like there are so many layers to that. And I feel like the swell of what you're doing with graphic medicine that brings it into prominence so that that research can start to show us and prove over and over again its value so that eventually that wave will crest and it will come into people's lives more commonly. And that's the stuff that when I think about it, I'm like, how do you do that? That is so hard. I can't even imagine trying to change an institution personally, because we're not trying to take them down. We're trying to like collaborate. Like if David
Right.
can collaborate with Goliath some way.
Right. And the way that that is usually like that you realize like so if I'm asked to give a talk, I often think about what is the context of the talk and what are the needs of the listeners. And so the way that you do that collaboration is you realize that like all that work you're trying to do to get your patients to not come back to the emergency room because they don't take their meds, once they see it in action and realize the way in which it works and it meets their needs, that's kind of how that collaboration I think happens. I think that's how, yeah, is you realize like you can solve a problem that they're struggling with, right? Or at least have a tool that maybe they could use on their own.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and actually that's a wonderful segue for me because one of the things I'm realizing I would like for these interviews is to actually hand the listeners something to take away, perhaps an exercise or just a question you might want to offer that people think about to stay engaged with this stuff or to maybe solve a problem in their own lives. Do you have any, yeah, questions or advice?
Yeah, so that's actually the one of the other goals of the book LB and Me was that I wanted to sort of pick up where I left off in my chapter of the Graphic Medicine Manifesto with like exercises that I've found really useful. And one of them that Linda Berry tells me that she finds useful is what I call the 4-panel emergency comic. When you just feel like I can't even make a comic about this. I'm so overwhelmed, right? And I give examples or I show examples of some. And for me, this was during the time when I was taking care of my mother and my aunt, and they were both at the end of their lives and both being unbelievably unable to see how difficult their situation was and how they were
Oh,
living in really
that's
unsafe
hard.
environments. Yeah, and I was responsible. I was the person responsible for each of them, and they lived two
Right.
hours away. And like that, I would tell myself, "What am I going to be like? I understand don't want to give up your autonomy, but this isn't safe." All that. So that
Hmm.
was so stressful all the time. And so I came up with this thing I call the 4-panel emergency comic, and it's just like the most raw just, you know, take a piece of paper and make a big X on a page, write a few words, draw, write a few words, draw, write a few words, draw. And it could take 5 minutes, it could take 2 minutes. But I can guarantee by the end of, if you're really thinking about and writing and drawing about whatever is what you're struggling with, and you do it that quickly, or give yourself permission to do it that quickly, you're going to come out on the other side. And you may not, like I use this with students all the time. One of the students said, at the end of it, I realized the problem was a lot bigger than I thought it was. And they thought like that was bad. I did a bad job. And I was like, no, that was a good outcome, because now you realize maybe you need to start asking for help. This is something you can't deal with on your own. Right. But sometimes you come to like, oh, you know what? Now that I got that down on paper, like I feel like I can manage it better, right? So it's interesting, but it will take you somewhere. That's the great thing about comics is, again, to quote Linda Berry, says that they are a mode of transportation, and I think that's absolutely right. They will take you somewhere. So, in a moment of this is my suggestion is this: consider just making a quick comic about whatever's on your mind, and it doesn't have to be something that anyone else is going to see. This is for you. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really amazing. It sounds like, it's for being with yourself in the moment and maybe a little bit of reflection and definitely expression. Like if you have to scribble it out. I love the big X
Yeah.
as the source. Because if it's an X in the page that's defining the gutters, so that's the space between each of the panels is these like big X lines, what order do you read them in? It's almost like a
Yeah.
circular reading order, or you could make a different decision each time. So perhaps you are a little bit less bound to the idea of even organizing whatever it is that you're processing. It's just like,
Yeah.
blah,
Get
on
it
the
out.
page.
Yeah, yeah. And I know like there are writers that talk about you're also like externalizing the problem.
Mhm.
And I found this with my making my book Taking Turns. I was really struggling with a lot of leftover difficulty around memories. I guess it's a form of PTSD, but not so traumatic for me. Just memories that I couldn't let go of, and I would still struggle with from when I was caring for people who I really loved very much who died of AIDS. And I
Mhm.
would, it would be Christmas, and I'd remember this thing that happened on Christmas or whatever. Like all these things that were just in my head. And when I did Taking Turns and I had the opportunity to externalize that, and now it's an object in the world that I can engage with when I choose to, but I can walk away from it.
I think that's incredibly important and also incredibly wise. Like, I've spent a lot of my life studying trauma, actually, but I would say it does come up frequently, both in all the learning I constantly do about trauma and how it heals, but it also comes up in any context where we're talking about identity, I think. Because we're often injured in ways that we carry as part of our identity if we haven't had a chance to process it. So processing even just in the moment that this problem and this pain is not consuming me because now part of it's over there. I
Hmm.
think that's another way to describe this idea of externalizing, is that it's actually
Hmm.
giving you a reminder that the pain is something you are feeling. You're not disappearing in that pain. And it can feel that way, and we certainly can disappear into pain, but doing something with it, anything at all, but
Hmm.
particularly something visual, because our brains process visual information so incredibly fast,
Hmm.
and also something, expressive, like getting it out, and something that will statically exist. So I know that like doing music is a really excellent way as well to feel your feelings and to rewire your brain. Like music is truly literal magic. And yet, you might play a song and then feel what you're feeling while playing and feel something change after, but there isn't anything to visually remind you that happened.
Yeah.
And to just even keep it as perhaps a way to store your pain in somewhere that is not the moment that you're in and somewhere that is not your body,
Right.
sounds incredibly useful and incredibly, well, magical, I would say. Like, it's another form of magic that we kind of trick our brains into being like, well, I put it on a piece of paper, so now it's not in me anymore. And, it's like a little spell and it just works. You reach for it over and
Right.
over again.
And
Especially
sometimes it won't
builds.
work, right? And that's why
Absolutely, yeah.
I always talk about having the toolboxes, caregivers, because different times, different things work. And so I have my students draw a toolbox and draw what's in it
That's wonderful.
so
Yeah.
that as they move forward, I'm always joking, like, put that on your refrigerator, right? Like, because so that you have it and remember that, oh, right, I could go
Yeah.
listen to that song, or I could,
Visual
whatever it is, I
reminders.
could take a yoga class, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they're huge, especially in neurodivergence. I'm going to need to
Hmm.
be able to see something that tells me that exists because I forget. I forget everything.
Yeah.
I forget an astonishing number of things.
Right.
So we learn, I mean, I'm mentioning neurodivergence so often, partly because like I only learned I was neurodivergent at 36, and also because it is something that like the more people can kind of normalize the tools that neurodivergent folks are going to benefit from, the less it feels like this huge thing that we're separate if you're neurodivergent or not. It's like everyone needs things to manage their lives. It's
Right.
just that we need
Right.
different things. And now if we
Right.
normalize them, it's not a big deal to say, oh, you don't need this, you need that instead. Great. And for me,
Right.
visual reminders are huge. Like, I don't own a label maker, but I think I'm probably going to at some
They're
point.
awesome. They're awesome.
I just do want. I once saw, I stayed at someone's house and I saw that they had put with a label maker little labels on the face surface of like the top of each drawer. So it doesn't face out when the drawer is closed, but only when you
Yeah.
open the drawer you see this little label that says what goes in the drawer. And I was like,
Right.
"Oh my God, that is life-changing."
Yeah, yeah, I had a friend who did that, and I was the same. I was like, "Oh, that's really useful." I remember walking into a classroom when I used to do a literacy thing, and this teacher was like, "Well, while you're doing your thing, you're going to notice that some students are going to get up and walk around in the back of the room. It's just what they need to do to think. They need to get up and walk." And I was like,
Fantastic.
"Oh my God, that is so makes sense to me."
Yeah.
Like I have to be sometimes on the periphery of a room to be able to process what's happening in it. Like
Yeah,
I wish I'd had a teacher that had that kind of insight, right? Versus no, you got
exactly.
to sit in your desk. No, I got to get up and move, and I can't think if I don't.
Yeah, those are all brilliant things. And I think also at some point, thankfully not so much now, but there was a little phase of the internet where life hacks were a big deal. And I'm like, these are all life hacks, guys. Like, our neurodivergence accommodations, it's a life hack.
Right,
Um,
right. Well, and like in disability studies, this whole idea of like universal design,
mm,
they call it universal design in architecture because everyone benefits.
yeah,
Everyone benefits from curbs. Everyone
yeah,
benefits from doorways that a wheelchair could get through.
yeah,
Everyone benefits. So why not do it? And if you don't need that accommodation now, again to what we said before, you may
yeah.
in the future.
You will,
So
or someone you know
right,
will. Like, yeah, it's
exactly.
very practical. And I think I love that because it gives me the idea we should be calling non-universal design like restrictive design or
Oh, I like that. That's good.
exclusive design because
Right.
those identify the actual problem.
Yeah, restrictive design. That's good. Yeah,
Because
yeah,
that's what it
yeah,
is. It's restricting
yeah.
everyone to, you can only pass in this amount of space if the door's not wide enough. And okay,
Right.
lots of people will walk through and not think about that, but it would be nice to acknowledge that it's restrictive for many people. So if
Yeah,
you're not restricted, that's not because the design is normal and fine, because that's what
right.
our sort of ableist baseline is that accommodations are something extra
Yeah,
rather than that's actually where the baseline is, where it should be,
yeah,
where it's universal. And then what we're doing is actually a deficit most of the time. We're designing in deficit for most people,
yeah.
and thinking in deficit for most people. And I really appreciate your trajectory, the work you've done, the way you share your stories, because one of my philosophies is also we show each other what's possible most of the
Mm,
time. We don't necessarily even name it, but by doing something, you're showing people it's possible to do that thing.
I like
And
that.
I feel like I've taken up so much of your time already, but I also think the editing on this episode is going to be pretty minimal. So it'll just be a long and lovely conversation for people to
Love
listen
it.
to.
Love it. That's great.
But is there anything you want to particularly call attention to as we leave, just to make sure people can follow up and look up your work or maybe a project that you're excited to share?
Well, I'm currently pivoting. I'm always thinking about, like, for my next project, like, what does the world need that I could possibly get excited about doing? Like, what do I have the skills for? What will excite me that so it'll actually get done? And right now, I'm zeroing in on comics for. I'm going to be teaching a course on comics for science communication, and really focusing in on comics for health advocacy
Mm,
and combating misinformation. So how, that's what the world needs, at least the
so
world that
important
I'm
right now.
aware of.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
And so how can comics be a part, how are comics already are, like, by
Mm,
many other people, and then looking at them, what makes an effective scientific communication, what
yeah.
makes an effective misinformation, what makes effective advocacy, all that stuff. So, like, looking at with the students the best of and what makes it good, and then what makes it maybe not work as well. One of the things I've thought a lot about with graphic medicine, and I've talked a lot with people about, is like best practices, right?
Hmm.
So, how can we communicate what the best practices are so it will be most effective? Not that you're not doing it right or anything like that. It's just
Sure.
that to have the best impact. So that's what I'm kind of moving towards, and moving away from, now that I finished that last book I took a sabbatical for, and moving back towards kind of thinking about those things. That's what I'm working on
Oh,
next.
very exciting. Well, I'll make sure that in the show notes we have links for the Graphic Medicine International Collective and your website, places people can find more comics of yours to read. Frankly, I was surprised there were so many I could just read on the website. It was amazing. I love that. And yeah, encourage people as well, I think, to sign up for and maybe even make a proposal to participate in future graphic medicine conferences, because those are kind of like the beating heart of this movement, is gathering with people every year. The way it keeps people motivated and engaged is really beautiful. So I'm going to personally
Yeah,
encourage
and
that.
thank you. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then another thing that comes to mind is that on the website there's a little box where you can sign up for our weekly newsletter, and we've just redesigned it so it's much more visually appealing. And that's kind of a way of corralling, to the extent that it comes across my social media feed, and a few other people who kind of feed me things to put in that newsletter, just to keep up with what's going on, and or like new things that we've seen that are out there, and just to have all those resources available.
That's brilliant. Yeah, coming straight to you. So if you want to take a break from social media, you can still get your graphic medicine information
Right.
every week.
Exactly. Once a
Um,
week. Yeah, we only send an email once a week on Saturdays. So
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. This is obviously a very short version of the conversation we could have, which would last days, hours, weeks, who knows. But I'm sure we will. And I'm sure we'll have you back.
good, good. I'm glad to hear it. And thank you for doing this. I think it's a wonderful project, and I'm really excited to share it, and to enjoy the other interviews you're doing.
Thank you so much. Wow, isn't she lovely? And all of the all of the health that I hear in her sense of navigating creativity just for herself is really beautiful. It's amazing to follow what's happening inside of you and whatever draws your attention and whatever practice just really feels good to enjoy. And MK's doing that. That's advice that I normally give to people, but she's on top of it already. So I hope you got as much out of that conversation as I did. And I also hope you remember to check out MK's website, where she's got all of her books, all of her self-published stuff, and the things other people have published, so you can investigate what her comics are all about for yourself. And don't forget, for me, a little subscribe, a little like, a little review would be super helpful. And also, that's a great way to let me know if you want a specific person to come on as a future guest. So for now, I'll say goodbye, but next week, I'll be back. If you loved listening to this episode, or if it stirred something new in you, I'd love you to leave us a review. Sharing your experiences is a gift to yourself and others, and definitely me. I love learning how my offerings land in other people, and it really helps the show to find those who need it. If you want to connect with myself and others who are practicing drawing health in community every Saturday, just go to drawinghealth.com and sign up for the weekly live class. It's truly some kind of magic, and it wouldn't be possible without our hosts, SAW. The Sequential Artist Workshop is a grassroots, nonprofit comic school and creative community. At SAW, we teach people how to tell stories and make comics in Gainesville, Florida, USA, and around the world via our online courses and resources. Go to sequentialartistworkshop.org to join our community of learners and artists today. Our theme music is Magic Hours by Aaron Como, made for the Main Street Music Library. The Main Street Music Library hosts instrumental music created with simple parameters, with scores and instructions for listeners to recreate the music themselves. Musicians, artists, and listeners are encouraged to borrow freely from the library and return the materials in a different form than they found them. Find out more at mainstreetmusiclibrary.com. This podcast is for information and exploration purposes only and is never intended as medical advice. Every viewer and listener is encouraged to seek medical attention at their own discretion. This podcast and the guided practices are tools for listeners to support their whole health and should always be used with care.